Hello, folks, and welcome to week number 11. So we're in the middle of Essay 3 here, and our real focus this week is going to be evaluating the sources that we're using for Essay 3. So this week, you guys already turned in your research questions with answers and sources. So look for feedback from me in the next day or two on that. You should have that pretty fast. What we're going to do this week is take a look at those sources and try to understand whether or not they're the best source for that specific question, and ultimately if there are any weaknesses and ultimately what the strengths are too. So we want to think through what we know about this source and why might we consider it to be credible. So just a little bit of background here. Make sure you read this evaluating sources link from the Prairie State Library. It sort of walks you through the process, as does this video from Professor Moore. She recorded this in one of the my other sections. So please engage with that video as well. This runs a little bit long, excuse me, but she does go through sort of how to go look at sources, and then she does a sample, okay? After that, there's a source evaluation template. I'll show you this in just a second. First, I want to show you the sample. If this sample sheet looks familiar, it's because it is. We used this in Essay 2. Of course, you guys used this sheet to compare your two scholarly articles against each other, okay? This is a modified version of the CRAP test that Professor Moore talks about in her video, okay? So we have currency and authority here. I've kind of rolled some of the relevancy things into authority. And then there is bias and point of view down here. And then, of course, study population or design might be something we need to consider here. And then what did you learn from the source? So we're actually going to do this, but instead of obviously using it on two articles that we're analyzing, which is what we did for Essay 2, we're actually going to do this to analyze the credibility of the sources we'd like to use in Essay 3. So this is that source evaluation template that I pointed out. This looks, obviously, it's the exact same format as the sample. So in here, in the source, for every source you're anticipating using in Essay 3, in other words, every source from which you got an answer to one of those questions, I want you to put your MLA citation here, and then go through the process of thinking through, well, what about the currency? How does this relate to the question, as well as how new is this information for us right now? What about the authority? What do we know about this? What do we know about the background of the authors? The journal, possibly, anything else that might play into that. Again, if it's a scholarly article in particular, or if it's a government source of data, where did this data come from? How was it compiled? And then finally, do we think there's bias or a specific point of view that's being held here? And then what did we learn? In other words, what questions did we answer from this? So for every source that you want to use in your paper, I want you to do one of these. I know that seems like a lot of work, but this is actually what we're doing this week. This is the vast majority of our work this week is tied up in doing this source evaluation. You really need to think through whether or not these are the right sources. Students are also asking, well, how many sources are appropriate for this? How many are required? And I always say the answer to that is as many as you need to answer the questions on your sheet. I will say, if you've got one source and one source answers all of your questions, the research topic you chose for this essay has already been done, and someone else has already done that work for you. That might be problematic just from the point of view of I'm hoping you guys will do some research here. If you've got or if you've got more than 7 or 8 sources, if you've got 10 or 12 or 15 sources, I might take a look at this and say you might be asking too many questions to answer in a short paper, okay? So I think sort of 4 to 7 is kind of the sweet spot, but there will be some exceptions to that depending on the topic that you're looking into and how complex it is, okay? So that just sort of is a rough guideline. If you fill up all of the columns here and you need more, just right-click in Microsoft Word. This will work in Google Docs as well, and just insert column to the right and just copy it, add another one over there, okay? All right, so if we come back here, what you're going to find, of course, is evaluating the video and the link to the library, and then these three things: the template I just showed you, the sample that I showed you, and then of course a place to turn it in. Now, the next thing we want to think about here is how your questions, how well you've answered those questions. And when I say how good those sources are, what I'm really thinking about here is as you go through this process of evaluating your sources, if you find that one of the answers to one of your questions comes from a source that you don't think is very credible for some reason, or alternatively, you just answered some more of your questions that you didn't have done before, what we've got here is simply right here, Essay 3 research answers. They were due, of course, this week already, but what you can do is resubmit them here, okay? So if you change your sources, if you add additional questions and answer those, if you answer questions that weren't answered before, just resubmit it right here, okay? This is really about me being able to give you feedback on how you're doing with the research process, okay? So just, I'm not putting a new due date in there. If you don't make any changes, you don't need to resubmit them, but this is an opportunity for me right now to say, oh, I think these might be some weak sources. You go through the source evaluation process, determine whether or not they are weak. If they are, you fix them and re-upload. Okay, so this is just an opportunity for you to get a little bit more feedback before you write your paper. And then finally, we have research discussion round number 3. So right here, there is a link to the research discussion itself, but I want to show you a Google Doc real quick. So if you go to your Google, the doc folder for your cohort group right now, you're going to find that there is a new document here. There's the research discussion, the source evaluation worksheet that you guys have just finished up this week, and now there's a new one. This is the other piece of work for this week. So these are all claims that were made in the 3 articles that you guys looked at. Many of these are claims that you guys identified in that claim section. So this is very much what you're doing for Essay 3 as well. So one of the claims in that first article was that consumer confidence was at its lowest point ever. What I want you guys to do as a group is to actually answer these questions. You don't need to do research by and large in that you don't need to find sources. I did give you sources. I think these sources will lead you to all of the correct answers. If you need additional information out of here, feel free, go out, find it. I don't have any worries about that. But I do think that these 5 sources here will answer pretty much all 10 of these questions. Now, again, don't hesitate to reach out to your group. You can break the questions up. Each person can take a couple questions, however you want to make that work, but that's just a matter of communicating with your group mates, okay? If we go back and take a look at this, you're going to see final answers for this are actually due in 2 weeks. So you guys have 2 weeks to work on answering these. I want you to get as much done as you can this week. I'll get you guys some feedback next week on these before final answers are due, so you guys can kind of work on that, okay? So, and then again, this is mimicking the process that we're doing on our own, right? We're trying to understand the answers here. One of the reasons I want to do this these questions in particular is they are questions that involve understanding data. And that's one of the really tough things about research is not just that you need to be able to read the scholarly article, not just you have to be able to write this paper, but you actually need to be able to understand the data that's presented in the research and be able to explain that to your reader. So these claims are sort of data-based. You will indeed have these sources include some data. It's a question of whether or not you can take that, understand what those numbers mean, and be able to apply it to these questions. So these 10 questions, work through with your group. Again, figure out how you want to do that, whether you want to break them up, I'll work on them, whatever works for you works for me. That'll be in your Google Drive folder, and I will, again, share an additional link with you guys just as a reminder in case you don't know how to get there. That's everything we've got going on this week, okay? It's really just 2 things. Analyze and, for credibility, evaluate those sources that you've want to use in Essay 3, and then begin work with your group on answering these questions. As always, if you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to let me know.